we'll move on to the next item then, and that is an update. And we've got Scott. I don't know if Gary Jensen's going to join. Nope, no help from Gary. All right, Scott, you're on.
All right. All right, can everyone see that okay? All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Scott Wadle, the director of the Wichita-Sedgwick County Metropolitan Area Planning Department. Very glad to be here today to talk to you about some of the exciting things taking place in our region. So I always try and get the longest title of every item on the agenda, and I tell you this one was a real challenge, but I think I accomplished it. So we're going to talk about Wichita land use, transportation, and regional connections. And the overview, that's quite simply what we're going to talk about. I'm going to try and provide you with a brief overview of a lot of different projects. I'm very excited about the projects, and if you've got questions, Mike Tan, Gary Jansen are here to help answer questions about those, but I want to kind of give you a flavor of some of the planning that's taking place regarding and related to transportation in Wichita. So first, a couple of notes about Wichita. From the WAMPO study, we know that there's quite a few folks who circulate within Wichita. We also know there's a lot of folks who come into Wichita on a daily basis, and a lot of folks from Wichita that are going out to other places in our region. So we know that Wichita is very integral to the transportation network overall for our region. Likewise, we also know that Wichita makes up a substantial portion of the population and the economy for the region. And so some of the examples that you're going to see in this presentation deal solely with Wichita, but they still impact quite a few folks in our region. And hopefully there are things also that could carry over to other communities in our region. So the first thing is land use planning, and we know that land use combined with the way that the community is developed, the urban form and transportation are all integral and related to each other. And this is a slide that I borrowed from another presentation, but what it really gets at is that the way that we lay out our communities impacts the ways that people are able to get around both comfortably, safe, and in a timely fashion. For instance, the community with a tight street grid, it's very simple for a student to get to the school. Likewise, if you do that in cul-de-sacs without street connections, you end up making a circuitous route, which takes a longer travel time, which therefore means that they're more likely to use certain modes of transportation over others. And it also impacts the route back, some safety issues. I'm not going to go into that. But it also impacts, though, the way that we lay out our street grids in our community impacts the amount of lanes that we need. In many cases, if we have a tight street grid, we're able to disperse traffic over a variety of streets, and those streets can therefore be smaller, so that therefore you can get to part of your safety questions that you've been confronted with. If we've got moderate connectivity, we know that we have to have collector streets and arterial streets that may be a little bit more robust. Likewise, if we get to connectivity that is not robust at all, we know that our arterials therefore have to carry a large amount of traffic. And you can see examples of this playing out in Atlanta and other regions. Likewise, we know that that has an impact on land use. For instance, in downtown areas and in with dense street grids, you typically find smaller stores. Likewise, if you get out into areas with lower connectivity, there's an emphasis on arterials, bigger parking lots, bigger shopping, more concentration of those activities. We also know that transportation impacts land use. And so here what we have is the airport hazard zoning map. And so in this case, we know that airports there are certain things that we have to do around airports to keep them viable and make sure that they can operate safely and effectively. And one of those things is looking at heights of the land use around them. So we have zoning, an overlay district in place to monitor those heights and make sure that that things don't get built so tall that they threaten the viability of the airports in our region, at least in Sedgwick County. Likewise, we also know that transportation can influence land use because we know of future transportation projects that are planned for, and we can accommodate those with overlay districts to ensure, again, that we don't have a land use that comes in that would hamper or inhibit our ability to provide that transportation infrastructure in the future. The next thing I'd like to move over to is a comprehensive plan. This looks out to 2035. In this case, it's citywide and countywide, and it includes a future land use guide and urban growth areas. And those are important when we're talking about transportation and the relationship between them. In this case, you can see the map. It's got a bunch of colors on it. It shows current land uses and future uses such as new employment, new residential. So it helps us when we're considering transportation investments. It also helps us when we're considering land use cases, zoning cases, and what's appropriate. Here in the red, I've identified some of the growth areas for Wichita. These are the areas that the city of Wichita is confident they can serve with water and sewer by the year 2035. So that again helps us to plan for infrastructure. Likewise, there are also locations within the existing city that are identified for new employment, new residential, that also help us to plan for infrastructure. And Gary can tell you more about development that's underway in infrastructure improvements for West Street and the North Industrial Corridor, for example. Also on this map, we've included what's commonly referred to as the Northwest Bypass. That's shown on this map again to help us make sure that we use informed decisions when we're talking about land use and infrastructure relationships. Drilling down further than the comprehensive plan, we also have a number of corridor plans, neighborhood plans that recommend land uses. And then from there, land use planning, let's talk a little bit about the transportation planning that we have. Similar to how we've talked about land use, we have a variety of different scales that we look at for transportation planning. First one is regional plans, which are all well acquainted with, but those help us to ensure that the connections that we're making on the edge of Wichita serve and connect into the region. We also have the smaller area and corridor plans. Again, these are generally smaller in area. They're usually done in conjunction with land use planning. So you commonly see these come out of a neighborhood plan and typically have a local steering committee, which is helping to ensure that it meets the community needs. We've also done a number of neighborhood circulation plans. These are some examples. They're currently in draft form, but this is for Uptown and for the Hilltop neighborhoods. So they identify specific transportation improvements that were recommended. We've also got a draft downtown streets plan that we're in the process of working on. This one looks at the corridors in and through downtown, their current configuration, and if there are any changes that are recommended to help us meet the needs today and into the future. So here's some examples of looking at Topeka and what the potential might be to have two-way traffic and bicycle facilities on there, as well as for Broadway with an emphasis on transit and seeing what that would look like going from a 4-lane configuration to a 3-lane configuration. In addition to area and corridor plans, we also have topic plans. So one of the topics right before this was safety. That is a concern on the Broadway corridor. And there's a draft plan that's underway for the Broadway corridor, and in fact, a pilot project that's coming out to help improve and address safety there, because we know that 4-lane street configurations are one of the more dangerous configurations that are out there because of the left turn movements. So in this plan, it envisions reducing that to a 3-lane configuration, which can handle about the same amount of traffic and is much, much safer. There's also a number of transit plans that have been done and are in the process of being implemented. So transit planning varies from accessibility studies to connections to other communities. And we'll see some more information about how those are being implemented. Airport planning is another activity that's taking place. We have airport plans for all of the airports, at least City of Wichita airports. And they commonly talk about the land use around them, both in terms of keeping the airports viable and safe, but also to talk about economic development as well. And so we see quite a bit of activity taking place with those, especially right now with the Jabara Airport. This is an example from one of their previous plans. Bicycle master plan, I could talk to you all for about 3 hours on this one, if not more. So just want to highlight that one. Awesome plan, lots of fun. We have a pedestrian master plan as well, and pedestrian infrastructure is a little bit different than maybe some of the other stuff that we deal with. It's difficult to say this corridor in particular is going to be have sidewalks on it, because we know the majority of streets do have sidewalks on them. And so it's really more about how do we design that infrastructure well, how is it designed safely, and what are some of the best practices. And so I would encourage you, if you get a chance, to check this out. This is probably the most important graphic here, is how you lay out the amenity zone, the pedestrian zone, and the frontage zone. And I would love to tell you more about that, but I'm going to keep moving. In addition, when you're talking about modes and multimodal, it's also important to consider parking. We have a draft plan that's currently in the works and discussions related to parking downtown especially. and looking at the demand, the use, the occupancy of parking spaces, and how can that be managed. And there's a lot of discussions about capacity of parking, also management of parking. And so this is a good opportunity to have those discussions relative to downtown. We also have the Places for People plan, which has been formally adopted by both Sedgwick County and the City of Wichita. And in this case, we're implementing it in 3 strategic ways. But I want to highlight that it recommends and calls on development in a way that boosts walkability. And one of the things that we've found out from our implementation work on this is that walkability can, more walkable environments can actually add to the tax base. And one of the reasons why they do that and they add to the fiscal resiliency of our communities is because there's less parking. And a reduction in parking means that there's more land area for development to take place on the property that is available, which means that your improvement values are higher, which means that your property taxes are increased. So there can be a real win, but of course it has to be done in a thoughtful way. This plan also talks about the way that we develop our streets and the frontages along there. Also how private development can help encourage walkable environments such as frontages up on the street. So that covers land use. We've talked a little bit about transportation planning. And then another thing that we do too is pilot projects here in Wichita. So the scooters, I don't know if you can see that map very well, but they're well used. You see them around downtown and other places in town. And it's been fun to see those roll out. Bike Share ICT, sponsored by Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Kansas. And likewise, another pilot project that fortunately has been sustained, providing another transportation option for folks in and around downtown. And then another form of pilot projects that we do is also temporary changes to physical environments. We've not done a whole lot of these, but we've done these on an as needed or a temporary basis, and they've been interesting to see what they look like for low cost trials with short durations. So that covers the land use planning, the transportation planning, and then moving on to regional connections and projects. So of course, one of the major investments that our region has made is in Kellogg. And so we've got some pictures here of East Kellogg and Kellogg overall, which has been improved. The WSU Innovation Campus, some of the buildings that are out there, one of the campus illustrations. The City of Wichita has worked on improving the infrastructure around there, a regional asset with Oliver and 17th Street, and a variety of the signals. And there's more planned there too to help integrate and provide better connections in and around the neighborhoods there. Amtrak, which has been an exciting conversation, which has been taking place in our region. So an important effort that's taking place. In a similar vein, but maybe a little bit different, is the electric buses and the electric bus fleet, which Mike Tan can talk all about. Also, the multimodal facility coming up in Delano, soon to start construction, right, Mike? And very excited about that. And then there's been a number of programs, not just infrastructure, but programs that have taken place, and student passes for USD 259 students. And if you haven't done it, I made the mistake of trying to catch a bus one time on Douglas, and it was completely full with students. I had a difficult time squeezing in. So if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to go down to East High and at least check this out, or one of the high schools. Also, free rides for veterans, which are actually subsidized by United Way, and then the program with USD 259. And they've posted some very impressive numbers. I think, Mike, is it 250,000 rides in the past 3 years, maybe, for USD 259? So 250,000 rides just with USD 259 students over the course of 3 years. And that's just one of the groups. I think WSU, I think, was like over 200,000. So they've been posting some very impressive numbers. The Redbud Path, ironically, I don't have a great photo of people using this, but I can tell you from personal experience that on Sunday mornings, if you try and ride, you'll have to slow down because there are so many people out on the path using it that you just, dog walkers and all kinds of stuff. And it's been a great connection between multiple communities. We have the North Junction project, which is getting underway. And then we also have the connection of 235 in Kellogg. So there's been quite a few very impressive infrastructure projects related to highways and interstates. So that is a very, very brief overview. I'll stand for any questions, and of course, I'll defer them then. I'll stand for them, but I'll defer them to Gary and to Mike for answering. So thank you.
Any questions? We don't want to talk about our bicycles or anything?
Everyone knows better than to get me started on that. So.
Well, very good. Well, I appreciate the briefing today, Scott.